Good afternoon to you, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for the 27th of July 2017. Hope you're having a good Thursday. In the Atlantic Basin, nothing of real consequence to worry about right now. This one area worth watching, way out in the deep tropics with a 30% chance of development in the longer term. If we click on this, we should be able to get a satellite picture. At least I thought we could. So let's just go up here and look at the satellite imagery. It's easier that way, perhaps. Visible animation of the Atlantic Basin this early afternoon. A couple of things that we can point out. Pretty strong upper level low and associated trough right here. We call this the tropical upper tropospheric trough. Just a really fancy way of saying strong upper level low with a trough axis coming down. Not favorable for development, especially if something wants to pass through or near this system. And then there's a weak area of low pressure here along the Georgia coast. That's something to watch because the waters are warm there, but I don't see anything in the modeling that indicates anything to worry about too much. And then this is the system that the Hurricane Center is watching, but overall this intrusion of dry, stable air nosing its way in from the northeast indicates overall that conditions still are just a little bit above the threshold of where we would expect them to be for things to be favorable for sustainable development. In other words, it's just not ready yet in the tropics, although we are getting closer. In the eastern Pacific, a few systems still dancing around out here. Tropical storm Irwin, really not much of an issue at all, and none of these are, for that matter, in terms of impacting land. Hurricane Hillary, still hanging on down there at about 80 miles per hour. And then another system, even at the 5-day time frame, very little chance of development from that. In fact, the Pacific is where all of the activity currently is located. A tropical storm and a typhoon in the western Pacific, a tropical storm and a hurricane in the eastern Pacific. And the one in the western Pacific, I want to point this out, this is the tropical storm Nisat, and you can see that the low-level clouds here are exposed. This is very much sheared like this, upper-level winds coming across, and it's just not as organized as we're used to seeing typhoons in the western Pacific. That being said, it is forecast by the Joint Typhoon Warning Center to eventually move across Taiwan in the next few days, but not very strong. The peak winds here are only about 80 knots, so maybe 90 miles per hour or so, and we've been used to seeing some very strong typhoons in this part of the world, just not this year for whatever reason. Looking at the Atlantic Basin on the wide shot here, for the most part the energy over Africa is there, but not extremely robust at the moment. This will pulse up probably as we move through the next couple of weeks. And then you can see here in a different perspective, very dry air coming off Africa still dominating the pattern, squashing the intertropical convergent zone here to the south, just not allowing for any deep convection to take root and develop into anything more than just a few masses of clouds. And in fact, if we look at the Saharan air layer analysis, that shows up pretty well. Large area of dry, dusty air coming off. And with it being late July, I say it again, this is something that is normal, and we expect to see pressures are still fairly high across the Atlantic Basin right now with a strong, dominant, what we call subtropical ridge. And I think that's going to hold on for some time to come. But there are signs over the next week or so that things will change. This is the pattern right now. All of this yellow here in the Atlantic Basin indicating sinking motion, a suppressed version of what we call a convectively coupled Kelvin wave. And lurking in the eastern Pacific, though, in today's analysis, you can see these blues. That's more favorable for development. And if we go out into time and we look at this, let's scroll down, a week out, really strong signal starts to show up here, and this will probably amplify even more so that by week 2, everything that was yellow is now blue, indicating more divergent air in the upper atmosphere, and very importantly too is air at the surface coming together or converging and enhancing convection, and that's why we call this a convectively coupled Kelvin wave. It's the convection, the storms, the thunderstorms we see in the tropics. Let me just go back to this. Let's get rid of the drawing here if I can. It's going to enhance. Let's look at that. There we go. So instead of seeing sort of this blank map out here with not much on it in terms of showers and thunderstorms, you begin to see much more of a blossoming effect as that convectively coupled Kelvin wave, or this energy, moves into the basin. And so by week 2, and at that point into August, and things are naturally supposed to be more active at that point anyway. So use the time now to prepare, do something to get yourself ready. It's a nice lull to do that. Check your generator, make sure it's running properly. If not, take it to the small engine repair shop now instead of waiting for a hurricane watch to be issued, because then everybody is going to be wanting to do that. It's the little things that make a big difference later. And heed my advice, use this quiet period to do something to make things less stressful should a hurricane, or a tropical storm for that matter, don't want to discount those if any of that comes your way. All right, well, that's it for me for today and for the rest of the week, with things being nice and quiet overall. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. That's my website, of course, for Hurricane Pro in HD. And we'll gather and talk again on Monday.